And I do think that if there's one thing that the data invites us to do, I always say that there's population level statistics, and that's useful for a community and a society to think about policy and to think about norms. But where the average data falls apart on a population level is when we start to look towards one kid. And turns out one kid isn't the average. They have a unique experience. And so the data does sort of invite us to turn towards our kids.
I am so excited today to welcome Erin Walsh, who has spent more than a decade translating brain science into practical strategies for families navigating tech, mental health, and modern adolescence. In her new forthcoming book, It's Their World: Teens, Screens, and the Science of Adolescence, she helps parents move beyond fear and toward a research-based, developmentally grounded approach to raising teens in the digital age. I cannot wait to share this conversation with you. I took pages of notes. I have so many great resources to share. I'm going to put all of those into the show notes below. All right. Erin, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to have you here today, to be chatting with you.
Grateful to be here.
I want to just dive in. I am really excited to talk to you about this book that you've written. It's Their World. Yeah, and I have had an opportunity to read a tiny little bit of it. I cannot wait to get mine in the mail.
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah, it comes out officially May 13th. Is that right? So
That's
we're right around the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, literally around
knocking
the corner.
on the door. Yeah.
Exciting. So I thought we'd just get started by talking about the title, especially. First thing, when we get the book, we're looking at it, and I imagine picking a title is a really intense, exciting thing to do. So It's Their World. Let's talk about that. What do you mean by that? And what is it that you want parents to understand when they're seeing this title?
Yeah, I think the title came from two separate sort of threads. And one was that a large whole offering of the book is that it's an invitation for parents to turn towards their teenagers with curiosity and with questions, and I think in many ways to understand the world that they are growing up in. So every generation sort of has to redefine what it means to care for kids. And while there's some things that are remarkably consistent generation after generation, like what's going on in their brain, the context of course changes in profound ways. So I hope that the title reflects that spirit of realizing that it is our kids' world, and it looks a little different than the one that many of us grew up in, even if you're a young parent. And the second thread is that the actual words, "It's Their World," actually were originated from a conversation with my youngest. So coming out of COVID, so what I often think of as a state of like deep digital immersion, where so much of our lives migrated onto screens. And as we as a family were starting to consider and look ahead to that transition to in-person school and in-person play, one of the things we did is we sat down with our kids and we were like, well, what do you want to continue from this time together? And what do you hope we change? Like, what are you looking forward to that's going to feel really different? And my youngest, within a millisecond, was like, I hope, don't stop coming to my worlds, which I think for some people it seems like an odd choice of words, but I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about the time that we'd spent together playing and creating in Minecraft, where, the offline opportunities for play had quickly disappeared. And so I had shown up in the digital world that mattered most to him at that time. And we had spent a lot of time playing and him laughing at me. And he was not asking me to keep coming to those spaces because I was good at Minecraft. I am not good at Minecraft. But I think he was young enough, right? He was not a teenager at that time, to admit that a parent showing up in a digital space that mattered to him was important. And he was old enough to be able to find those words. So he's sort of in that sweet spot of development where he was old enough to find words to articulate something that mattered, and young enough to sort of admit that he still wanted his parents around. And that, to me, I think, that "don't stop coming to my worlds" in many ways is a beautiful invitation for parents. I don't think we need to take the invitation literally, that we need to hop onto TikTok and we need to be constantly in multiplayer games online. That's not the idea. I think it's a spirit of the invitation to keep showing up and to keep turning towards our kids to better understand what do they need to thrive in a world dominated by screens.
Yeah. You know what I love? Two things I love about what you just shared. One is this idea that that we are going into a space that where they are the expert. I've seen this with my own kids, and I'm using expert loosely, but like I bet your son was much better at Minecraft than you were, as you just articulated, right?
1000%
Yeah,
better.
yeah. And I often find, my husband and I, we read a lot. We're constantly talking about like having these ideas and sharing these things with our kids and engaging in conversation. We're very aware that we often end up sounding like the expert
Yeah.
on something and
Transmitting the
not meaning
knowledge.
to, yeah, but it's like
Yeah.
sharing that and giving our kids opportunities to do that back to
Yeah.
us and for it to be in a space that they enjoy, something like Minecraft, which my two younger still play,
Yeah.
and that it can be a way in which they impart their knowledge on you in a way.
Yeah.
It's like what a great
Yeah.
gift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they have this, like you said, they have this expertise, they have lived experience. And of course, something like Minecraft is maybe a little bit on the younger set. And I think the same, yeah, like you said, the spirit of the invitation of what's the relationship we have with kids around tech. Because it would be easy, I think, for us to say, well, it's on a screen, so therefore it must be bad, or we tell stories about, or therefore I must feel like, oh, I'm not a good parent if that's the space where I'm connecting with my kid. And of course, there's lots of room for conversation about balance and how we connect with kids offline and online. But I think you're right. These spaces where kids feel like they have expertise and something to offer and something
Yeah.
to invite us into.
Into. Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I think it's really easy to just feel overwhelmed by the volume of media, of technology, right? And trying to manage that. I mean, just the sheer number of passwords I now have written on papers that I'm
Yes.
managing, right, for
Yeah.
myself and my kids now.
Beyond.
But it doesn't have to just be a scary thing. I think you talk a lot about this, that it can be a beautiful thing. It can be a way of sharing. It can be lots of things. And so, for someone who's feeling overwhelmed by sort of the idea that there is a right way of doing this, or that that we are, if we don't find that one way of being, we might screw it up or we might make this mistake. Like how can we approach this with maybe a more open mind, or a way of finding our path forward instead of just feeling that overwhelm?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful question because I think one of the gifts of this moment is that we have a lot of coverage and attention and awareness that we should be paying attention to social media devices, the platforms, the content that kids are watching. So that's the gift of this moment, is that there's a lot of opportunity to be aware and to read headlines. The challenge is that it can lead us to a place of fear, to a place of there's so many ways that this could go wrong, and the stakes are so high. What I offer in the book is that we can both acknowledge the harms and recognize that some of those principles from developmental science actually remind us that there are so many ways to get it right. That there are a lot of different ways that parents can show up in their kids' digital lives in ways that are protective, in ways that help them thrive. And that while the news headlines make us feel like we're on like a tight wire where one wrong step and the internet will destroy our kids, as we look at the actual data, we see a little bit of a different story, that the media and technology are not inherently good or bad. They are powerful. And the good or bad depends upon how we use them, our specific kids and their specific strengths and vulnerabilities, the kinds of content they're viewing, what else is going on in our family system. So one size fits all solutions tend to sound good in a soundbite, and they tend to backfire in our homes. Now, that doesn't mean there's no guidance. And Kaya, we can talk about that. Doesn't mean we know nothing and we're just like, oh, do whatever. But I do think it's a little bit of like, let's take a breath and remember that we actually know a lot about what young people need to thrive. We've been studying that for decades. We may not know every piece of data about the latest app that's coming out this week or how AI is transforming things, but we know a lot about kids. And when we can focus on those basic protective factors and remember that my family does it and what my kid needs might be different from what your family needs or what your kid is doing, I think if we can take that deep breath, we actually are more likely to turn towards our kids with the sort of warmth and boundaries that they need, instead of the panic and control that this feeling of if the stakes are high and if I don't get it right, it's all over. We don't really see that. We don't see that in the data.
Oh my gosh, so many ideas just running through my head right now. I'm thinking, I love this idea. We understand how brains develop. And I know there are probably arguments out there, in the ethos right now that brains are developing differently given the kind of environment that we're in, which we could debate whether that's happening or not. But there are things we do know about how brains develop and how young people develop, how people develop. And we can kind of think about those broadly. I love this idea also, and I talk a lot about this when I'm talking about nutrition and setting goals around food and how we eat as a family. There is an element of understanding yourself in all of this and understanding your child. And what I hear you saying is a piece of this, and a really hard piece of this. And gosh, wouldn't I love for us all as parents to have the amount of time to just really dive into this, is really understanding your individual child. And that is I'm going to tell you, that's different for my 16-year-old than it is for my 12-year-old.
Anybody with more than one
Right?
kid learns that lesson really fast. Yeah.
Just when you think you have it down, you're
It's
like,
like,
nope, here comes the
different
next
kid.
one.
Yeah.
But really understanding what it is that your child needs, how they think, how they are developing, and where they are. And yeah, there are these guidelines, but they might be here or here in that, wide range. You might not talk about this in your book at all, but you do have a lot of other experience in thinking about parenting and raising healthy, resilient kids. What is, I don't know, one or two things, if you can narrow it down, or 10, if that's what you can think of, that as a parent we can do to begin to understand our kids in that way, so that we can now not just have these blanket rules, but really be thoughtful in our approach to digital worlds?
Yeah, I love that. And I do think that if there's one thing that the data invites us to do, I always say that there's population level statistics, and that's useful for a community and a society to think about policy and to think about norms. But where the average data falls apart on a population level is when we start to look towards one kid. And turns out one kid isn't the average. They have a unique experience. And so the data does sort of invite us to turn towards our kids. Dr. Jacqueline Nisi, who's one of the nation's leading researchers on adolescent social media use and mental health, says, if we look at the data, it's like the mental health outcomes, for example, are really dependent on who your kid is and what they're doing online. Like, it really is this dynamic interaction of who they are, like you just beautifully noted. And then what are they doing? What's the purpose of it? Who are they with? So what does that mean? That means that one of the core tools in our toolkit is curiosity. And it can sound a little fuzzy. It can sound a little like, this is so nice, curious parenting. It's actually a really evidence-based tool, so evidence-based that the American Academy of Pediatrics Centers for Excellence on Social Media and Mental Health just released like conversation starters for parents to use with kids from early childhood through adolescence, because curious questions don't just sound good. They give us really important information, because what that helps us do is if we turn towards our kids with curiosity, we start looking at them instead of writing a story about what must be happening. So a kid with a phone, we write a story, right, about what might be happening. That kid is accessing inappropriate content. That kid is avoiding their friends. Maybe the story is that kid is texting or connecting with a friend or a cousin that they can't see face to face because they live in another state. We don't know unless we've turned towards them with some level of curious questions. So curious questions are one tool in our toolkit, Kaya. And then I want to acknowledge that I'm also a parent, so I have an 8th grader and a 5th, so soon to be a middle schooler and a high schooler next year. And sometimes even as a parent, I'm like, well, some of our children answer curious questions like this. They're like, I'm good. And, yeah. And then no further information. Right. Yeah. So we want a couple sort of curious questions, which is like just these light entry points to conversation, also with observations. So kids might say, I'm doing great, But then our observation of them is that they are engaging in negative self-talk. They are constantly editing photos, posting photos. Their entire sense of self-worth rises and falls based on online feedback. Like that's important information for us to notice as well. We might also notice that they are creative and collaborative and feel a sense of belonging in an online space that they interact in. So being curious allows us to get some important data points about how is my kid doing.
Yes.
And we can talk about, we do have some good general guideposts that we can all kind of say, okay, these are some real solid protective factors, but we want to bring those into conversation first and foremost with who is my kid? What are they doing online? And how's it going? Is it working? Is it helping? Is it serving some sort of function, or is it undermining what they want and need to do in the world at their age?
Gosh. That's brilliant. I am going to find those links to those conversation
Yeah,
starters and put them in any kind of show note, whatever this turns into. I'm going to
Yeah.
make sure that people have access to. That's fantastic. I'm thinking about the idea too, these observations, how are our children doing in these digital spaces? Love that. I'm thinking of my own observations of myself when I see my kids in these digital spaces, because it's probably my issue, where like they are doing fine watching Simpsons for the 50th time. And I am so tired of it being on in the room. Or, the laundry, this is such a minor thing, and my kids are actually great. If I say, look, laundry hasn't been done, you've got to turn it off. They will turn it off. They don't fight me. I appreciate that. But some of it is really, it is my own issue here to deal with, is like, I see you on a screen. I just jump to you're doing something on a screen instead of they're practicing their typing or they're in their Spanish homework, whatever it might be. And so it's a good personal check too.
Kaya, that is it's so beautiful, and I think comes from your expertise and just as a parent, but a professional. But I do think that we tend to think of parenting as something, right, that we need to do to the kids,
Yes.
like especially around tech. We're like, well, the kids these days, and whether it's our own tech use and our own relationship with tech, what are we modeling? But also, right, the stories we tell ourselves about what might be happening. And we can skew those stories in either direction. One of those, if we've had a long day, we just read a terrifying article about phones and kids, we come home and they're online. The story we tell ourselves might be, right, that's trash and I'm trash. Like, that's bad. And then I must be a bad parent. And so we come at them, with all of that emotional loading of this means that I'm a failure because the unwritten rule is the best parent would do screen time 0.
Yes.
We don't see that in the data, nor do we see that in people's real lives. So it's an unhealthy bar. Of course, we can skew it in the other direction, where we tell ourselves kids are fine, this is all overblown, kids are all right. And that kind of avoidance of the real harms, the real tricky choices that we do have to make, that young people do have access to a lot of spaces that were not designed with their mental health and well-being in mind. We want to find, like so much in parenting, when we notice ourselves having those reactions, it's like, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath, give
What's going on
myself a
here?
little space.
Yeah.
And then if I still feel that way, what do I do?
Yeah. What kind of advice do you give for folks who are co-parenting, and whatever that co-parenting situation looks like, where this idea of what is a reasonable amount of digital use or access to, where there may be differences in how two parents or caregivers, whatever that situation looks like how do we talk to each other about that?
Beautiful. I think it's like within household and across households, co-parenting, especially around tech use, can be tricky. The over-under dynamic, if your listeners or your community is aware of this dynamic, can come in really fast around co-parenting. The over-under dynamic is one person thinks screens are bad, one person thinks they're not a big deal. And we actually start probably pretty close together, but then what happens without talking about it is that one parent, comes in and is like, the screens have to go off. And then the other parent is like, whether it's within the same house or across households, like, that parent needs to lighten up. Kids, like, this is not that big of a deal. I'm a gamer. So they loosen. And then to overcompensate, the other parent is like, well, somebody needs to be a parent around here. So then they further control, they
Yeah.
further limit. And so pretty soon we can be pretty far apart on these issues where one parent is tightly controlling, lecturing, banning, and the other parent is pretty hands off. Um, the goal would be to find some areas of mutual agreement. That's not always easy, but if we can find a time to have a conversation, not in the middle of our kids playing like their sixth hour of
I
video
just
games
told
with
you to
their
get up and
friends.
you've just
Yeah,
said it's fine.
totally.
Yeah.
Like this is a calmer time where we can get some agreement on the purpose. Like, what do we care most for our kid? What are our shared goals, right? And it doesn't have to be around screens right away. It can also be around, we want them to be well rested. We want them to have one or two good friendships. We want them to feel like they are trying new things, right? So, what are those things that we agree on that we want for our kid? And then we can talk about when might screens help and when might they get in the way of those shared goals. And having a few that are evidence based where they really matter. It's like setting limits where they matter. So,
Yes. Where would
I
those
know.
be?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
sleep. It's like we have a lot of good data on adolescents, kids, and sleep. So there aren't a lot of great arguments out there that say like, I don't, sleep disruption, getting 100 texts overnight, no big deal. Like we do see that it's a big deal, and sleep really matters. So we might decide that we're going to protect family time. We're going to protect sleep. We're going to make sure that our kid has something, an offline activity that they're interested in that sparks their that sort of like interest and joy that an adolescent is driven to figure out who am I, who do I want to be, and what do I like to do in the world. So we're thinking about what are those core areas that we can agree upon, knowing that if it's at another parent's house, maybe their screen time minutes might be higher, but hopefully we're aligned on things like sleep, connection, moving our bodies, and protecting study or focus. Like if we could do those four spaces, we have a lot of evidence that would be really protective versus agreeing on one show or this many minutes of screen
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Which is maybe feels like the easier thing to do. Oh, 120 minutes.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
it. Then we're done.
Yeah,
It's
and it's
fine.
a relic
Then
in
we're going to
many
be fine.
ways
Yeah.
of talking about screen time in terms of minutes. And of course, in the extremes, that matters. We know that it's not great for kids to come home and just game for 6 straight hours. So, but in that messy middle, minutes kind of fall apart. It's like, what are they doing? Who are they doing it with? Why are they there? And what is it crowding out?
Yeah. Gosh, we should all be asking ourselves those
Right?
questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
really
What is
should.
it that I really want to be doing with my time? How am I spending this? What really matters to me? Yeah. There's a piece of this. It's kind of, you're suggesting that we identify, and I know this is a really loaded word, but we're kind of identifying our values and our family values and like what is important to us? Where do we want to put our time and energy? My daughter, my 16-year-old spends a lot of time on recently on her phone. And when I asked her what she was doing, we kind of dug into this a little bit. Well, we had taken a family trip. My husband makes videos of our trips, and she was making her own version of our family trip video. I mean, what a wonderful,
This is what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
Yeah, like the story you could have told yourself about what's happening
yeah,
versus what's actually happening.
that's right. Yeah,
And right,
yeah,
as long as that's not crowding out other things.
that's right.
I do think what you just noted, Kaya, and there's another resource I think that folks might want to grapple with. Kids don't love to do this with their parents per se, but if your kid is in a youth group or, making sure that your kid's school might know about these resources, the Harvard's Center for Digital Thriving has a beautiful exercise. It's actually called the values exercise, and it's asking young people themselves to identify what matters to me, right? Is my core value to be a good friend? Is it about fairness? Like, is it about presence? Is it physical activity? Like, what are the things that matter most to me? And it's just invitation for young people to start thinking about, when does tech help me do that? When does it make it easier to live into that? And when might it get in the way? So again, are we going to sit around as a family in a circle and do a values exercise? Like, I know my kids aren't going to want to do that.
Want to do that.
No.
Yeah.
But we can at least have it as a little bit of a framework. And the spirit of the invitation is that kids have values too. Like, kids have things that matter to them. And what we know from the research is that when kids experience what we call digital agency, so they have some sense that they can sort of have choices and meaningful control over their digital lives, that instead of a tech company controlling them, that they have some sense that I can use tech in a way that helps me move towards my goals. That's a work in progress that develops over time as they grow and as they practice, but that adults who are willing to not just say turn that off, but like what matters to you
Yes.
and how is tech helping and how is it hurting? So that those exercises can of course be really beautiful in spaces where there's near peers or counselors or other adults that care about our teens that can have those kinds of conversations in ways that parents can't always. But I just want to note that is really evidence-based to help young people step into the driver's seat. Because of course the elephant in the room, we're having this like, oh, this there can be these beautiful possibilities, is that unfortunately most of the platforms designed for kids today, or designed for not for
Anyone.
kids, they're
Hmm.
designed for adults, and then kids are there, of course don't have adolescent developmental goals in mind and don't have sort of what's best for an adolescent at the core of those design choices. They're designed to capture time and attention. And so increasingly, it's a big ask to ask a kid to have their digital agency is a huge lift for any of us. And so some of these spaces just they don't set kids up for success because they're so good at grabbing and holding their
Right.
attention and taking it away from whether it's designing a video about a family vacation or something else that they love or need to do in their life. So it's tough. The design of platforms matters as well.
Even just bringing that awareness to our kids' attention,
Yeah.
at the right stage.
Yeah.
This is what these platforms are trying to do. So thinking about that, helping a young person develop digital agency, and again, in your book, it's structured around child development, right? And the stages of child development. Where does this fit into that? So I guess really the question is really more about kind of general age or stage of
Yeah.
development where you can start working with
Yeah.
your kids to talk about this idea of digital agency and helping them understand their own values and how
Yeah.
tech can
Yeah.
help or hurt.
Yeah, well, you noted that the book was structured around development, and I made that decision very purposefully. Not just because I love thinking about adolescent development. I think it's really helpful for me as a parent, but I do think that oftentimes with tech, we've alluded to this already, we can engage in what I call this game of like worry whack-a-mole, where it's like we can't even write books fast enough to keep up with the next thing that might be going wrong. Um, and I structured the book not around digital risks, but around developmental tasks. So each chapter is a core developmental task of your teenager. So who am I? Where do I belong? How can I contribute? What's my purpose? And understanding what are the developmental changes happening in the brain that sort of prime adolescents to be asking these core questions. And they're built to explore those questions, and they're going to explore them in healthy ways or they're going to explore them in not so healthy ways. And understanding that we can't just turn off devices, but we have to help them. What are the healthy ways that my kid can start figuring out identity, can start figuring out friendship and conflict and drama, can start figuring out things like self-consciousness and social comparison. Those are all part of their developmental work. And so what that means is that engaging them in those questions around agency, honestly, that can start pretty young.
Okay.
But I specifically focused on adolescence because what we know about the adolescent stage, and when I say adolescence, by the way, Kaya, it's like, you know this, but it's just a good reminder for parents. We're
Yes,
talking like
please.
10 to 25.
Yeah.
Like we are not talking 13. The neurological changes in the adolescent brain start, on average a couple years before their physical bodies start to change. So that helps parents sometimes explain when they're like, they're already acting like a teenager.
Uh-huh.
How is this happening? Part of that is because those brain changes start early. But one of the things that we know about the teenage brain in particular is that they're especially sensitive to respect and status. This is good. This is a good thing. This is adaptive. They need to do this incredibly brave thing called growing up. They need to go from our home to being out in the world. And in order to do that, they have to venture out beyond the little circles we've cultivated for them. And so being able to be emotion detectors, being able to figure out where do I fit in, being able to get a sense of, do I belong in this group? Do I have status? Am I excluded or included? That really matters for their core job of growing up. So we're glad their brains are built this way. But that also means that they are less likely to take what we say is truth as the truth. Like a younger
Full
kid, you can be
stop.
like, "This is not safe online." They're like, "Okay," and an older kid is like, "Yeah, who said so?" You don't know what you're talking about. And when we come at them with lectures, when we come at them with, do as I say, um, that status sensitivity in the teenage brain is like
Yes.
whoop whoop whoop. So what we see in the data is that sort of like do this because it's good for you and do this because adults said so works pretty well around digital citizenship in elementary school. And it doesn't have an impact on risk-taking behaviors as kids move into adolescence, because at that age, they want to be in the driver's seat of their lives. That doesn't mean they don't want adults to guide them. They actually tell researchers they need adult support. They want parents to be talking to them about the tricky stuff that they're grappling with online, but they want parents to be problem solvers with them. They want parents to respect that they have some skills, they have something to contribute, and that they want to have choices. That does not mean we just hand them a phone and say, good luck out there, and I'm here to be a sounding board. The teen brain also really needs boundaries to feel safe. Their brain is like, how far can I go? And our job is to be like, this is how far. But within those core boundaries, we want to develop as much sense of agency and skill building and choice making and making many mistakes and learning from my mistakes as we can. So I think we want little kids to also feel a sense of agency, but that becomes critical to their outcomes as they head into adolescence, that they start to feel and step into the driver's seat of their digital lives, what Dr. Katie Davis at UW-Washington calls self-directed use, self-directed community-supported use, right? So they're in the driver's seat of their digital life, and they have adults and peers around them helping them make sense of their experiences. When they make mistakes, when they celebrate their accomplishments, whatever is happening, that they're not doing it alone. So I think that it is a tricky time, adolescence, because we want to sort of loosen, but not entirely let go. And
Yeah.
that's, the book is really meant to be a sort of a compassionate guide
Yes.
to that art of where do the boundaries really matter? Like, no, you can't have your phone in your room at night. But then within that, like, what are your values? What
Right.
gets in the way?
Right.
What's helping? What can you teach me? And that's that tricky, tender balance we're all trying to figure out with
Yes,
our
that's
teens.
yes, so much trying. You just used a couple of phrases that I think are really interesting, and I know you and I have sort of genetic roots in this idea of risk, given our
Yeah.
parents, right?
Yeah.
Erin
Yeah.
and I know each other for
Yeah.
years because our
Yeah.
parents worked together.
So
This idea
beautiful.
of risk-taking behaviors.
Yeah.
And so I just wrote that phrase down, and you were kind of talking about that in a much broader context. But it made me think about the idea of risk-taking behaviors in real life versus online,
Yeah.
the potential consequences of those, the different ways that they interact, and so I'm trying to develop a really articulate question, and I don't necessarily have one. Maybe you can just talk about, is our goal in helping our kids understand technology and digital technologies and digital media, I think especially, and social media, if we get right down to it, to experience those risk-taking behaviors in that digital space in a safer way, in a different way. Like, there are different consequences online than there
Yeah.
are
Yep.
offline. You had this great story. It was really early on in the book about something you went off to, like, nature camp, and
Yeah. Yeah.
cut your hair and came back, and it was at a time pre
Cut my hair with
social
a Swiss
media.
Army knife,
Yes,
tiny
yeah.
little scissors. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it looked beautiful,
Great
is what
time.
you're
It was
saying. It looked
stunning.
great. Yeah.
Stunning. Yeah, it was gorgeous.
But you said, in today's world, the example you gave is like, if it had been today, someone could have either snapped a picture and made fun of me, and that would be permanent. Or they could have, used some kind of AI alteration of their own hairstyle and posted something in solidarity with me.
Yeah.
And and so I think it's Lisa D'Amour who talks a lot about this, that because adolescents are so what's the word I'm looking for? They make decisions really quickly, right? We
Yeah.
don't
Yep.
necessarily take time to pause
Yep.
and think about our actions. that these postings, this kind of activity online, it has a level of permanence that it doesn't in the real world, and that we all need to be aware of that. So somewhere in there's a question
Yeah.
about risk taking and online
Yeah.
behavior versus in real life and how to balance. And is our goal as a parent really to just help our kids understand that, or to protect them from that?
Yeah.
Like, how can we be thinking about that?
Yeah, I think every time we talk about teens, risk and risk taking sort of bubbles to the top because it is part of why it's like, oh, it's scary. Because we do see that it is a time of increased sort of risk taking, sensation seeking. Part of that, of course, is because, right, that the emotional center of their brain gets supercharged and upgraded first, followed by the cortex, which is that slowing down, that thoughtful decision maker. As I note in the book, and as many other, authors and experts in adolescence have reminded us, this is not a bug in development. This does not mean our kids' brains are broken. This does not mean that they are just risks to be managed. They're really built for discovery. They're built to go out and explore the world through trial and error to figure out what I'm capable of. And so what you noted is that comes with of course, during adolescence, we want to be sure that the risks we're not going to get rid of risk taking. Risk taking is how they learn. And there can be pro-social risk taking. It's very risky to stand up in front of my peers and talk about online drama and toxicity and online cruelty and like changing a culture towards online kindness and accountability or whatever it is, or starting a digital well-being club and creating PSAs that are in every class. Like that's socially risky and can fuel that same reward loop that teenagers are seeking, right? Of sort of peer approval with that little bit of sort of sensation seeking around uncertainty. So not all risk taking is bad, and it is part of how young people discover. So the question is, how do we, knowing that that's central to their development, how do we make sure that the spaces that they're in allow for the kinds of mistakes that when the mistake happens,
Yes.
it is that we are not sending them into something that is truly harmful. And if that does happen, do they know they can come to us for help? So in other words, we do want to think about in terms of our boundaries and their developmental stage. Do the spaces that they're spending time in online set them up for success in terms of healthy risk taking? Is this the kind of place that's built for them to roam and discover and make mistakes that allow them to like learn, reflect, redo over and over and over again? Or is it, to be honest, like a toxic, a place that's not built for that kind of healthy risk taking? And what we see in the data is, you mentioned social media. Early adolescence is what we call this. It's emerging as this window of sensitivity where these developmental changes around sensation seeking, risk seeking, social comparison sort of converge with the design features in social media of like infinite content, popularity metrics, the ability to, the way that we talked about that they're designed for us to stay on for a long time. They're very, what we call this sort of like, they're very visually based at a time when teens start to be really self-conscious. There's a lot of focus on appearance. So those design features in many ways can create the sort of perfect storm for adolescent risk taking. So we do, right? We talked about that there isn't a one size fits all solution. But we do see in the data that there's good reason to sort of delay some of these spaces as long as possible, because we want young people to practice healthy risk taking and mistakes in spaces that are built so that when they make those mistakes, the risk isn't so big and so harmful that it takes more work and time to recover from.
Yeah.
And where they have some space to do what they're supposed to do, which is like bumble around a little bit and not necessarily have it all figured out and not look perfect all the time. So I know a lot of early adolescents are in social media, and there's ways that we can reduce risk when they're there. But I think one of the lessons of early adolescence is that we want to find online spaces where they can meet their developmental needs without having the stakes be too high when they do what they're supposed to do. So what does that look like? It looks like taking seriously the they need to be with friends, like speaking and being with friends. So is there a way to satisfy that with technology that doesn't go right to social media as our first go, right? Is a group text thread first where they can make those mistakes, but the pool of visibility is a little smaller. So those are the kinds of questions we start asking. What's the developmental need? How do we meet it in a digital environment that is at least has some guardrails up so that they can, as they make those mistakes, that there's a context there that can help them sort of learn from it and recover. So we can slowly expand where those spaces are. And the mistakes are going to happen. That doesn't mean that they should never have been there, but if they're in an environment that is not setting them up for success, that becomes really tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's messy.
Is there something that I or we, anybody who ends up watching and listening to this as an adult, could say that would not totally embarrass a young person if we saw them taking these pro-social risks or like engaging in a behavior that we just want to say, hey, I see what you're doing, and good for you in this way. And again, that like good for you is absolutely not the way as a grown up, unless you want to seem 46, and then it's probably, exactly. But I feel like, so my kids go to a school where I have the ability to interact with students regularly, kids in their class. Their middle school is 6th, 7th, and 8th. It's all combined. It's a very small school. And I go in once a week, and I'm there during lunch. And they're not on screens, and there's not a lot of digital use there, but I get to know these kids a little bit. And I love the idea of being able to be an adult in the world that acknowledges this kind of positive behavior when I see it. And I don't need to draw it out. We don't need to have a long conversation about it. It's just something that signals to a young person, I'm a grown-up in the world who sees what you're doing, and I just want to acknowledge it. And so I don't know, do you have a thing that you say when you see someone who's doing that?
A couple things. One is just, I love the invitation because it is a reminder of like one of our jobs is to hold up an accurate mirror to kids. And so if we're only pointing out the things that are going wrong, right? So what do we see that's going right? And then just a couple of notes on what we can say. One is we will probably sound old. Like, there is no, like, in fact, sometimes at a certain age, if we try to sound too young,
we look even older. It's
like,
worse.
they already know. There's nothing we can say that makes us cool. And so just like letting ourselves off the hook for that, like when we work with adolescents, it's like near peers have a different, right? If I'm a college student working with high school students or middle school, that's a different world. By the time once you're a parent, no matter how young you are, you're not cool anymore. Yeah. So it doesn't matter.
Tim, my husband the other day said to my 16-year-old, he's like, do kids say fire? And she just looked at him like he was crazy. Yeah. Oh, God, like, Dad, don't embarrass yourself.
The question is embarrassing. Your lack of knowledge is embarrassing. Yeah.
That's right. Sorry. I interrupted. Yeah.
No, I just think it's helpful for us to be like, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to be dorky. That's okay. But there are ways that we can make it more, what we want to do is reinforce the behavior.
Yes.
So sometimes it's those, especially if we have a relationship with the kid, is not making a huge deal out of it, but also doing it when we have those like sort of little one-on-one moments, as opposed to, I mean, if you are beloved by a group of kids, and especially maybe early adolescent, maybe we can pull off like a group like Kaya thinks you're great.
No, we're not there.
But we can, general like. Okay, so in adolescence, right, this self-consciousness is developmentally right on time. So sometimes attention can feel a little bit like, oh, that's embarrassing, or I don't want to be called out, even if it's being called in and being praised. So in other words, I think, if we're at the lunch table, maybe instead of going up in front of all 12 of their friends, it's like they're walking out, we just walk up alongside them and like, I saw that was amazing. Keep doing it. Like, I'm so impressed. It's okay for us to just use our adult words. I think the context matters more of making sure we're not putting them on the spot, that we're not sort of putting them on a stage in front of their peers, unless they're asking for it. Like some kids, they're like, yeah, give me the award. Tell me I'm amazing. But a lot of kids want that just sort of relational, like, I see you. That was so brave. And you're making like, you got this.
I love that. Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Great. Great advice. What would you say to the parent whose kids have not yet gotten here, right? So they may be listening to this like in preparation or reading your book in preparation for the time that is coming.
Yeah.
I take this where you want to go with it. Is it about access to technology, period? First phones, first iPads, whatever. Is it more about sort of what they're doing in those spaces? And, but if someone is coming to this and they haven't yet gotten there yet and they're preparing,
Yeah.
read your book. That's step number one. Number two, I don't know. Yeah. Like what would you say to those parents?
Yeah. I mean, I hope the book is, I hope the book is a confidence booster. I think that a lot of us approach adolescence with a feeling of like, ooh, it can feel a little scary. Teens get a really bad rap. What's cool is that when I talk to parents now, a lot of us are really enjoying our teenagers, and that is not because it is always easy. Like it is a really hard and confusing, disorienting stage and quite volatile. But I hope the book is a reminder of what's coming. That helps us give a little context for some of the behaviors we associate with adolescence that can be overwhelming, bewildering, scary, unsettling, and to remind that there's a developmental context for me as a parent helps me get a little space and build a really critical thing we need for parenting teens, which is empathy. Empathy for what they're doing in the world. And to do that in 2025 with all of the technology and everything that's going on, where it's a big lift. And so as opposed to when our kids roll their eyes at us for the first time or slam the door for the first time, we can take it really personally. And my hope is that the book reminds us that sometimes it's not personal, it's developmental, and gives us that little space we need to be gentle to ourselves, to be gentle to our kids. Not that we might deliver a consequence and a boundary, but how we come at it might change. So I do hope the book is a useful preparation for parents who are coming. And there also are some really practical things that parents of younger kids are asking. So things like, when should my kid get their first device? I think that's like a question I get all the time, hoping that there's a magical number.
Yeah.
Science
tell
says,
me, please, Erin, just tell me.
science says, 15. Science says 13. Science says 18. It's like, I'm so sorry to report. We have better data on delaying social media. The first device is just real muddy. We have plenty of 16-year-olds who are suffering and struggling with their phones, and some 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds who are doing just fine, and everything in between. But here is what I will. Should we dig into this a little bit? This is a little bit afield from the question you asked, but I think it is.
No, it's not. It's great. Yeah.
1 out of 4 8-year-olds has their own cell phone in this country. So that means that we are not waiting until adolescence for some of these core digital age questions. And I have my offering in the book is that it's grounded in this sense of developmental needs and tasks and how can they be successful. So as opposed to what age, my question for families is, what's the purpose? Is the purpose agreed upon by the family? Does it persist over time? So if the purpose is because all my friends have it, and then 2 weeks later the kid doesn't really care, that might not be a purpose that we all agree upon that persists over time. If the purpose is every single person on my soccer team is, they know what's going on, they're hanging out with each other, I am the only one who's missing out on things, and that sort of purpose persists over time, then we can think, okay, what is the least amount of technology we can deliver to meet that need so that we're inching towards right, like sort of expanding access to things. So it could be that for younger kids, it could be that it's like the group chat is on my phone or on the family iPad. So it's really thinking about, we want to respect their growing needs. What's the least amount of technology we can deliver to meet those needs and practice skills? And then do we have agreements in place that can help us figure out how are we going to use this? So it's like training wheels. We're just doing training wheels. It might seem over the top and it doesn't have to be a super formal document, but it's like, how are we going to stay safe? How are we going to stay kind? What are we going to do when something happens that doesn't feel good? How are we going to take care of our other obligations, right? So whatever those agreements are, that we're using these like sort of mini experiments with tech to sort of to build that musculature. Because when it's Snapchat later, or when it's whatever is coming down with AI, that we have years of practice. So, and Kaya, I can get you, we have like a first device guide that walks
Love
people
that.
through those questions if folks are interested in that kind of framework.
I love that.
Yeah.
I will say from personal experience, I'll just offer this up. If you really want to have fun with this, and the issue really is just how to communicate with friends, buy your kids a phone where they can only make phone calls and
Yeah.
just see how they engage in that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you,
Yeah. Yeah. It's
we
amazing.
had a flip phone. I was like, you want to talk to your friends?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Here is a phone where you can
Yeah.
call them. And they kind of looked at it like, what
They're
am I
like,
supposed
what
to do with this
is
thing?
this? They're like, this thing doesn't do anything. You're like, it does a miraculous thing.
Does.
Voices
Yeah.
travel through time and space.
And of course, then I really aged myself by
Yeah.
telling them that
Yeah.
when I was younger, I had to stretch the cord from the kitchen to
Stretching
my
the cord.
bedroom,
I
right?
know we all did that for hours, which is a good reminder that when we think our kids are, won't stop texting, it's like,
Yeah.
wow, I really spent a lot of time with that cord
So
stretched down
much
the
time.
hallway, hours and hours and hours.
So much time on the phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the spirit that's it's the first device question is kind of a cool one because on one hand it's very practical and on the other hand it invites these kind of bigger questions of like, how are we talking about this? What's the need? A need for a kid whose parents live in two different places, they're parenting across households, they have multiple siblings that they're helping, might have a really different need for a phone at a different time.
Yeah.
But slow it down.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
can always expand access.
That's
it is
right.
way harder to take it away from a teenager.
Yeah, you're right. A phone at 8 does not mean all of the other
No,
things that are
no, it
on
could be, I
our
think,
mini
right,
computers. Yeah.
right. If it's
Yeah.
safety, then a device that just calls parents and there's four trusted adults. That's the only thing the thing does. So all of a sudden we've met that need without unleashing a lot of other spaces that the kids might not have skills yet to be successful
Yeah. I
in
love
those
that.
spaces.
Purposeful. Let's just be thoughtful and
Just slow it
purposeful.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't need to judge each other. We're each going to do
Oh,
it differently.
oh my goodness.
We're
Yes.
each going to have different needs. That purpose is going to be different in different families at different times. But slowing it down gives us space and room to make sure that they have the skills they need to navigate
Yeah.
world that we're unleashing upon
Yeah.
them every time they get expanded access.
Yes, and to bring it back full circle, and and this idea again of curiosity with our kids
Yeah.
and our own needs in this situation, but also with our fellow parents.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
tell me about that. How is
Yeah.
that working for you? How are you using it? How
Yeah.
are you? Yeah,
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. And these, and I know, Kai, we're probably wrapping up, but I think this can, in many ways, what we've talked about, would it have been easier if we had spent the hour saying, this is the age, don't go here. These three, I do think we've shared some practical things. So we want to protect sleep. We want to protect connection. We want to make sure it's not interfering with movement and outdoor time and family time. So there's plenty of room for some clear boundaries, but there is this messiness that can make us feel like, am I doing this right? Like there is this fuzziness, and our kids do not turn to us and say, you're doing it right.
Yeah,
You are
thank
nailing
you,
it.
Mom.
Like
I love
thank
you so much.
They don't. It's a delayed gratification activity. And that's why it's helpful for us to remind, like you said, turn to each other with curiosity, cheer each other on, and remind ourselves that when we have to set the hard boundaries and it's just hard to cheer each other on. And when we're doing the messy, curious questions, partnership, problem solving, it's not always going to feel like we nailed it. It's going to feel like it's a work in progress, but so is the teenage brain.
Yes,
And so it
brilliant.
takes years, it takes reps of conversations with caring adults to figure it out.
Love that. And I know if we had spent this last hour with you giving me a step-by-step, this, not this, do this, that, honestly, I don't know if that would have felt better, because the minute I am not doing one of those things, now I'm failing. And now I'm dealing with my own, emotional,
Shame.
emotional state around,
Yeah.
around not doing it right.
Yep.
Or like, I need
Yep.
to change everything now. And that,
Yep.
so,
Yeah, and it turns out that when we feel shame, that is not a great place to parent from. So when we read something in a book that sounds really great, but then we try to turn towards our own kids and it all falls apart because one size fits all solutions tend to do so. That feeling of I'm not enough, failing, that's not when we tend to access our most robust parenting tools. That's when we tend to reach for tools that tend to backfire, whether it's like judging our kids, judging ourselves, raging around the house. Those are the kinds of things that I think, I appreciate you saying that because they can sound good. in a podcast, but they don't fit into our lives.
No.
And it's not what our kids often need to thrive.
Yep. Or us to thrive as parents.
Yeah.
Last question, Erin, and then I might ask a couple personal questions.
Yeah.
Well, we can,
Yeah.
hit pause on the recording. If there was one other book besides yours that you would recommend someone read.
I love that question. Okay, do you want it to be
So let me
in the
ask you,
same
because
realm?
so one would be a book that has been really meaningful for you as you've gone through this process, and that you would say, if you are curious to learn more about this topic, this general kind of topic, and then if you are a fiction reader, let's also share a fiction book or poetry or something. Like something that is not trying to improve ourselves, just have fun in the world.
Beautiful. Okay, well, I really love, I have deep and profound respect for the team of folks over at the Harvard Graduate School of Education Center for Digital Thriving. They describe themselves as critical optimists, and I share that mindset, right? Where we have deep concern about the digital world and harms as it's unfolding and as it is designed today, and we have a lot of optimism for young people's capacity and our capacity to work with our kids to help navigate it. So their book, this is Emily Weinstein and Carrie James, wrote the book Behind Their Screens: What Kids Are Facing and Adults Are Missing. It's a more academic book. So my book is directed just towards parents and is really with that parenting lens of sort of highly conversational, lots of tools, lots of tips. But that book, in terms of the research side and in terms of centering adolescent voices, I just think is such a beautiful reminder that we can't do research about screens to teens. We have to have them help us make sense of the data as we gather it.
Fantastic. Love it.
Yeah.
I will get a link to that, and I'll put that. Yes.
It's a beautiful book. And Emily Weinstein read my book, It's Their World, and I was thrilled to have her, give her support. So I just want to send it back their way.
Oh my gosh,
possible.
I can't imagine. Can't imagine what you've done. You've birthed a third child, let's just say, right? I mean, truly.
It does feel a little bit like it's out there.
Yes.
Why away, little bird? I hope you're supportive to people who need it.
Yes.
And one of my favorite authors in the whole world is Louise Erdrich, and she is a Minnesota author, writer, and her book, The Mighty Red, I just finished.
Okay.
And it's just fiction. It's not just fiction, but it's fiction. It has nothing to do with teens and screens, but everything to do with relationships and complex characters and beautiful writing. And it's just gorgeous.
Love it.
Yeah. So good.
Fantastic.
I'm curious. Now you have to tell me a fiction book or a poetry book or something that you've read.
Sure. So let's see. The last book I just read, this one I listened to on audio, Last House, which was really interesting.
Last House?
Last House. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Yep. It was a fabulous audiobook. Before that, I read The God of the Woods, which seems to be on all kinds of lists, and it was brilliant. I loved that. That was also a work of fiction, and kind of like a mystery.
Okay. Fun.
Yeah, it takes place in the Adirondacks. Yeah, New York. Yeah. It's that was really, really well done.
I love these books. I will say one more book that I just read out loud. Have you read Impossible Creatures? It's so my youngest, he's going into middle school next year, but it's fantasy. Anyway, I cried I cried for so many things at the end of that book.
Okay.
My 10-year-old my 11-year-old was like, I think you like it. He loved it too. He's like, you're always crying. I'm not surprised you're always crying, but you're still crying. Like, you've been crying now for a while. It's really
Impossible
beautiful.
Creatures. Okay. It's a story.
It's dragons and
Okay.
which is not always my jam, but by the ending.
Love that. Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. All right. Well, those are all going to be in the links too. Okay. A couple of personal questions. Do you have more time? Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, I do.
So my oldest is 16. I have a girl, 16, a boy, 13, and a girl, 12. Okay. And my oldest is 16. And she got her first phone only for calling, whatever number of allowed numbers we had going into 8th grade.
Yep. Same with mine. Yeah,
I was not really ready for that, but anyway, that's when she got her first phone. And it was, again, texting only. No social media. She did not have internet on the device. It was just for calling. Before she was allowed to have any social media, Tim made her read 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media Account. This is a book that is referenced in the Netflix documentary, and now the
Yeah.
name is escaping me. Yes, you know the one
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about here.
Yes. Yeah. The one.
Anyway, she slogged through that book and
Yeah.
did it, rolling
Yeah.
her eyes the
Yes.
whole way. But Dad said that's what you need to
Yeah.
do. And the only social media she has right now is Pinterest, and
Yeah.
that's what we've
Yep.
let her have. And she talks about, she can still see TikTok
Yeah.
things are sent through Pinterest. I
Yeah.
mean, Pinterest
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
like a
It's
collection
all
now.
of
It's
them are
not,
now
yeah.
like,
It's
yeah,
like
we can see the content in many places.
yes,
Yeah.
why we distinguish anymore. But she
Yeah.
doesn't post on anything. And if someone has posted
Yep.
something to Insta, her friends have
Yep.
to show it to
And the
her.
algorithm is significantly different on Pinterest than TikTok. So,
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't even know that, but
yeah, it's better. Better for
we
kids.
we were late night or walking after dinner the other night, and I was commenting about our dog. This is such a long story. Sorry.
No,
Our
no,
dog is
that's great.
terrible at walking on a leash because I did not train her to walk on a leash.
Yeah.
She just
Yeah.
thinks that she owns the world, the
Yeah,
walk.
I've got this
And I was
one
telling
situation.
this to Eleanor, my oldest, that, I didn't do this with Winnie. I was such a bad dog parent. She's like, well, I think, she said, at least you did a pretty good job with us parenting. Uh-huh.
I
And then,
love that.
so she's so sweet. But then she paused and she was like, or did you? Because I feel,
Okay, this is so great. This is everything. It's like parenting a teenager in
yes,
its perfect
it's like
encapsulation.
all those emotions
Yes,
all at once.
all
And
the
she's like,
things.
or did you? Because I kind of feel lonely a lot. Like I don't really feel connected. I feel like I'm more mature than all my friends, and I want to have conversations that no one else wants to have. And I wonder if there is, and I'm not willing to give up on this yet, but or to just, throw my hands up and say, okay, fine, have it. But
Yeah.
I do wonder what her not having some of those things and engaging in those conversations and being a part of those online communities, what that maybe not has done to her, but how that has influenced her own growth and development, and kind of what sometimes I want her, she's a voracious reader. Sometimes I want her to just put down the book and, like, I don't know, do you want to go hang out at the mall? I don't,
Yeah,
do
yeah,
people
yeah.
even do that anymore?
What
What do you
do
want to
something
do
like
with your
kind of,
friends?
yeah,
Yeah.
ridiculous and yeah, yeah,
So I don't know, what do
yeah,
you think about, like,
yeah,
can we go too far? Can we, like, again, this is
yeah.
like,
Yep,
we need to look at what it's doing for our own kids.
yep,
And,
yep, yep.
she is happy. She
Yeah,
does really
yeah,
well in school. She does have friends. She feels like she gives more to her friends than they give to her. And I don't think that having social media would fix
yeah,
that. But I do, just
yeah.
this,
You're just curious about like
yes.
what
Yeah.
is
And this
the yeah,
little bug in the back of my head that's like, what are the things that happen when we don't
yeah,
when we're not a part of those online
yeah,
spaces?
yeah. I mean, there isn't. I mean, as you know, there isn't like an easy answer, but I do think that there is just grappling with that tension and acknowledging that it's there is worth it. And I agree. I don't know that it means necessarily like, okay, all the kids are in TikTok starting at 8 and let's go. But there is a real, like the kinds of questions I would ask, you've already answered. So for some kids, what we do see, right, there's this tension between wanting to protect them from the spaces that we know are not designed with their health and development in mind, and then peer connection and being a part of not just being able to like transactionally communicate, but there's like a culture building, right? We have common videos we're seeing, we have common memes we're seeing. There's like this experience in these online spaces. And I think we just want to watch for when the cost of exclusion becomes greater than the risk in those spaces. And that trade-off changes with age, right? So like with a 12-year-old, it's like, well, we're going to have to find other ways to boost up your social life because the cost is pretty high in this space. But as we're getting to like older adolescents, that becomes more muddy. You're sharing things that indicates that she's doing pretty well. So there's some kids who really truly feel it's impacting their sense of
Mm-hmm.
self, it's impacting their sense of social efficacy. They're really that sense of exclusion is like it's really having a real impact on their mental health. And there's an acknowledging that that's a real thing. um, but it sounds like you're in a little bit more of a gray space where she's acknowledging that there are some pieces of it that don't feel good. And you're also seeing that she has friends, she's engaged in things,
Yes,
she's,
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, does she want, like, is she asking to be in, I don't know what the space of choice for her friends is, whether it's like Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram, but
That is not a question we have been
yeah,
asked in a long time.
yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of kids seeming like, what, you're already acting like a teenager and you're whatever, like I feel like she has jumped from 12 to 32.
Yeah.
She's just like,
Yeah.
it's silly what they do. I don't really
Yeah.
want to be a part of it. She like almost can't stomach it sometimes. And she's
Yeah.
just like so mature.
Yeah.
So no,
Yeah.
I bring this all up. We're not really struggling with, do we give her
No,
access to that?
no.
But
You're
just
just
this,
observing.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I think it is interesting for some of these kids, and probably partially based, like, some kids in her shoes might be feeling not in their own skin and really left out. But it sounds like she's more like, I'm kind of a self-actualized, like, person, and my peers are just like watching dumb YouTube reels, and
yes,
like, I'm ready to move on. And that's where I think what it's like she's gonna have a blast in college. Like,
yeah,
like I do think that fine, like it's like her development, whether it's her temperament plus having more time and space,
yeah,
probably outside of some of those areas.
yeah.
Yeah, we don't have, that would be really interesting to look at. We don't have, that's one of the things in the research that's tricky is you can't really take, you do social media, you don't, and we follow you for 6 years. Like,
Yeah,
it's really hard to do those kinds of studies, and we don't do them.
of
So
course.
we don't see, but it's so fascinating. We only have our observations of kids for
Yeah.
whom,
And
but
any real study like that would have to be a retrospect,
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. It
retrospective
would have to
look
be like a
at what like
naturalistic, like, oh, you
finding. Yeah.
happen to not have it, but then there's all the
So
kids
many
who happen to
confounding
not have
factors.
it.
Yeah.
Have a
Yeah.
billion confounding factors. So
Yeah.
it's impossible to do it that
Yeah.
way.
Yes.
But I do think it's interesting, that your daughter, in some ways, yeah, she has practiced a different set of skills probably, and her she's not experiencing distress from that. She's experiencing distress from the observation that her desires and needs and wants in a friendship are not being met
That's
by
right.
her current peer set.
Yes.
And
And that feels equally challenging to navigate with her.
oh,
I mean,
totally.
maybe more
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, gosh, honey,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because she's not 18, she's 16. You're
yeah.
like, you got a couple more years. You're like, how quickly do we get in PSEO so you can be around
Yeah.
more mature kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
my 13-year-old, he's a boy. He's in a small class. There are 12, mostly boys. None of them have. I mean, they have switches, and he has an
Yeah. Yeah.
iPad that he
Yeah.
uses, but he
Yeah.
doesn't even use Messenger Kids on that
Yeah.
anymore. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they've kind of outgrown that.
Yeah.
None of his friends are moving towards having personal devices like that, and they are
Yeah.
not talking about social media. They are
Yeah.
not like they just seem
Yeah.
so far
Yeah.
from that. It's
Yeah.
really fascinating, and it's just, he is at the age.
How old is
This
he again?
He's 13. He's going
Yeah.
into eighth
Yeah. Yeah.
grade.
Yep.
This is when his sister got a phone.
Yeah.
I don't know who, besides talking to his sister, he like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
grandparents who live,
Yeah.
many, many states
Yeah.
away. It's like, he's not going to be connecting with his friends on it. It's just such an interesting, this idea that your
Totally.
kids are so different and just have different needs.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it is interesting. The subcultures of like social media is just like not a thing in our, like, it's not an ask, it's not a desire.
Yeah.
YouTube,
Yes.
different
Oh my
story.
gosh.
It's a different story. Which is interesting. I mean, YouTube is the number one app for kids now from early childhood all the way through adolescence. So the like app that adolescents say they can't live without is actually YouTube, not TikTok or Snap or these other things. So it is, that's probably one of the more universal sort of parenting challenges is managing YouTube and YouTube Shorts. But it is, I do think that sort of when the collective starts to shift a bit and delay it, it does make it easier.
It does make it easier. Yeah. And we just happen to, right? We have not had a single conversation as parents.
Yeah.
Like we're all banding together to do this. It's just
Yeah. It's just
all
happening.
following our kids. Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
Okay. Last question for you.
Yeah.
This could take us down
Yeah. Let's go.
a rabbit hole that we just do
go.
not want
Yeah.
to. But in thinking about preparing to talk to you about this and in thinking about online worlds and I don't know that you cover this in the book at all. And hopefully you don't have to because of what I'm about to ask you about. But How do we safely, where do we want to go with this? The access to pornography
I
that
definitely talk
our,
about it in the book. Yeah. Big time. Yeah. Yeah.
what do
Yeah.
we do? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
so two girls bookend my boy, and I think equally for all of them.
Yeah.
How do we do this?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it up, actually. And I do talk about it in the book, and I have written about it before. And interestingly, it is like the article I write that gets the most response. Like we are
Really?
just we simultaneously like don't want to talk about it because it's overwhelming and like and it's like we're all so hungry for advice and research. It is, first of all, we have to be talking about it. We have to ask the question. And we have to update our understanding. So you probably have a more updated understanding, but when we look at sort of the national data, as parents are still not talking to their kids about sex first or about porn or relationships, and we're definitely not talking about all three, and sort of thinking about sex, relationships, and then like sexting, pornography, and that sort of nexus of sex related stuff.
Yeah.
So I do tackle it in the book partially because it's like you can't talk about the teen brain without talking about sex and sexuality. Like it is part of what's happening biologically. Whether we talk to them about it or not, they're
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's right on time. So what we have to update our understanding about is what online porn is, what kinds of things they have access to. So, I think we have parents generally are aware that it's accessible, obviously, like it's just at our fingertips anytime anyone can access it. But I do think a lot of parents haven't upgraded their understanding of what kind of sex kids are watching and what kinds of porn, I should say, kids are watching. And they're like the increase in sort of violent, aggressive, sex acts that kids have access to that they're
Yeah.
starting to normalize, whether it's, and again, this gets a little hard, but we have to be able to start naming that. Like adolescents are now talking about choking as like a sex act that is like people do,
Just,
which some people do, but as like a typical normed early sexual experience, um, we are like outsourcing sex ed to porn, and that porn has gotten more and more extreme. And so we have to understand that in order to like get our courage up to be like, we have to be talking about this.
yeah.
And we have to talk about it early. And what we know is protective is talking about it early, talking about it often, making sure that we do have that we've put up as many safeguards as we can. So that combination of like making sure the filters are on, making sure the parental controls are on, and if they want to find it, they can find it.
I know. Yeah.
And the age of first exposure is quite young, and oftentimes because older siblings are showing it to them. So talking about it in age appropriate ways. As kids get older, we can even start. I was just talking with Dr. Megan Moss, who's one of the leading researchers on this in the country, and she reminded me that as adolescents get older, we can even start talking to them about not just the basic talking points, like this isn't real sex, this is a performance,
Yeah.
this is edited, this is not where we should learn about sex, sexuality, and consent. But also increasingly, we don't know that it was consensually uploaded. So
Yes.
that is a new and really important for older adolescents to understand that something that they might feel as exciting or pleasurable might be someone else's source of trauma.
Yeah.
There is no age verification on who is in, it's the age of the uploader, not the age of the person in the film. So that's very important information for as we develop that sort of critical lens, of the kinds of conversations that we want to have, that we normalize. You might feel excited, you might feel curious, you might feel these things, and what's the cost of that? What's like basic porn talking points that we want to have, and those are in the book, and
Yeah.
it's
Great.
uncomfortable to talk about, but I'm really glad you asked
Yeah.
because it's not a one and done. So we can't, you know this, but we can't talk about it once and then hope that they don't visit it. And
Yeah.
we want them to talk to somebody. If I mean, they will see things that are. It is so much more violent and aggressive. One, at an easy clip than it ever has been before.
It's amazing. I mean, just in the conversations that Tim and I have had about it, and even recently talking about this, he made this comment that rolled off of his tongue so easily, about kind of what is out there. And to your point about aggressive, and it was a term that is absolutely just an unacceptable and aggressive sex act. And I couldn't believe how easily it rolled off his tongue to be able to talk about it. So a lot of this, of course, I know is about me being able to be comfortable with this. And I don't, I want to learn about it, but I don't want to have to go and Google it to figure out, okay, the average number, and here's kind of what you're going to find out there. And I mean, even just the other day was thinking, like, I would almost rather, hand a magazine, like something where I know how it was obtained, that there's, all of that kind of around it, to your point. But gosh,
no,
yeah,
it's really it's tricky because it's embedded in this, like, we already flood adolescents with sexual imagery, just in pop culture, but then don't talk to them about sex, relationships, or consent. So it's like porn is stepping into a gap. So the good news is that if we're talking to kids about it frequently and they have good terms and they're learning about sex and safer sex and like consent and relationships, I mean, that's hugely protective. So that's the good news, is that there is like this, it doesn't take much to fill the gap. Like, they aren't getting a lot of information. And then just keeping the conversation going. What's hard is that, of course, it's ridden with shame. So kids don't talk. If they see something that's really upsetting, it's hard to come to an adult and talk about it. So also making sure that we're delivering that age-old message of, like, I will never make you sorry.
That's right.
When you come to me.
That's a really good point.
I will never make you sorry for coming to me if something is hard or wrong.
Yeah. And for kids who maybe are not ready to go there fully, so my 12-year-old as an example, she's got 2 older siblings, so she's been pulled along a little bit faster than the others. And a lot of times when we start to have these conversations with her, she is just, it's like fingers in the ears. She's just not, she's not there, does not want to hear about it. And yet I don't want to not talk about it, or not have it be a reality. And so I'm going to assume that part of this is also just the same idea of understanding where your kids are, observing them, and letting them be a part in helping to guide what is appropriate. You answer their questions until they don't have any more questions, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I wonder where did that question come from? And, our favorite thing with our youngest is to be like, you don't have to look at us. You could be under a blanket. Yeah. You just have to be in the same room. Yeah. And you have to, like, have your ears open. But good. There's some safety things, like, this might feel awkward, it might feel wobbly, but, like, there's some things that we need to say because we care about you and we're here to keep you safe. Because it is, especially at that age, like, they're so mortified.
Yes.
And we can talk about it in more age appropriate terms. Yeah. But I think what parents worry about is that they're going to introduce the idea to kids. And I get that, because it's kind of horrifying to think about, your 11-year-old seeing this. But what we do know from the data is that it's just, if it's going to be a kid on the bus who, like, flips the phone around and there it is. So it's like, we don't have to get deep into, like, talking about choking behaviors, but we can talk about, like, what is it? Yeah. Naked bodies on the internet. It's not for kids. Yeah. Right. It is made for adults. What do you do if you see it? It's like those kinds of things.
You're right.
Pretty early.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to reading that part of your book once. Yes, we will.
I mean, we're all in it. Yeah. We're all in it together. I mean, I have a 14-year-old boy, and we're all doing the best we can.
We are. We are. And we have a village. That's one of the things I really do feel. And I want my kids to have other people they can go to, other grown-ups that they can go to. This may be something that you are familiar with too. My dad would always talk about three grown-ups.
We love it. Yes.
And so,
we don't have to be, in fact, we're usually not the people that, it's like well, some kids, but oftentimes it might be, or just knowing they could come to us. I
Yeah.
love that reminder of like, even just knowing they could come to us is protective.
Yeah.
Even if
right.
they choose to just tell a friend instead.
Right.
It's like they know an adult is there if things get really, really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh,
Well, what a
I know.
fabulous note for us to end on.
Well, it's a good one because it's really realistic and it's totally, I appreciate you bringing it up. And it's like we can, there are all these possibilities and all these strengths and all these cool things happening. And it's just a lot and what they have at their fingertips. And that is probably the example of one that I think we don't talk about enough in ways that are healthy and accessible to folks.
And like you said, we're all thinking about it. We're all dealing with it.
Everyone's stressed about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then our response to stress is either to not talk. Yeah. It's just,
let's just put it
well,
out
and then
there.
it brings up, like you said, it brings up all of our own, we
Yes.
all have so much baggage around sex, sexuality, porn, shame, like name a topic. None of these ones are easy for most adults. And so then we're trying to figure out how do we do something differently with our kids, but then they have access to these, they say, teenagers in studies, they say that they know it's not real, but then they do also report wanting to see what would feel good by watching porn. So it's like, it's like cognitively, I know it's a performance, but emotionally, I'm still getting lessons from this.
Yeah. Still turn to it for something.
Yeah.
And how do I talk about this without bringing my own baggage to it, or my own issues or my own history and my own, my own past. In a way that doesn't scare, doesn't ignite, doesn't, like any of these things, right? It's just like
so much to try to do. It's like, how do you be like, ultimately we want positive sexual relationships. So we want healthy messaging, but then we're like, but this stuff really,
I can't know you in the way that you know you.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, this was an absolute pleasure.
It was so nice to connect. And just personally, such a treat to reconnect. It's been way too long.
Agreed. Would absolutely love to. I mean, good luck. I imagine you have a book tour. Yeah. Are you like heading out on the road?
Most of it's going to be in the fall because then it'll be back to school. So I'll be doing some bookstores and stuff this summer and a bunch of media stuff. But then the speaking is mostly back to school time. It's all lined up. So.
And all your speaking opportunities, I mean, maybe someday, so writing and speaking, I mean, I would love to someday, when there is a moment to breathe, pick your brain on some of the things you've been able to do. And, again, if there are ways that we can collaborate or communities, like sharing these community building ideas or
and
digital classes.
And I'd love to keep amplifying you're so good, Kaya. You're so good. You're such a good science communicator, family communicator. So just anytime you want us to amplify stuff you're working on.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Awesome. Love to your family.
Yes, same.
Love to your parents always. Say hi to Tim.
I will. And, slide into summer. Good luck.
Yeah. And good. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Rooting for quick recovery so the rest of that can just be like vacation land. I hope. Fingers crossed. All right.
Take care.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks for hanging out with me on The Weekly Parent. If something you heard today made you think, laugh, or feel just a little more human, don't be shy. Subscribe, text it to your BFF or group chat, or leave us a review. Remember, you'll find free tools, downloads, and whatever else I've cooked up this week in the show notes. Check those out. Parenting is messy. Let's not do it alone. See you next time.